You know, I don't read a huge amount of comics, and the few that I do read are often pretty straightforward and not embroiled in tons of controversy or multiple different stories spread over different books with different names. Back in the early days of Sonic, however, that wasn't the case, and it can make keeping track of the continuity and the overall story, especially when you're trying to cover the stories in chronological order like I am, very difficult. Even when they're doing a fairly straightforward game adaptation like this special issue here, they still cram it full of backup stories and hints as to what's going to be happening later down the line. The cover of this special is pretty damn good. I like the dynamics of all the different characters, and there's a lot of different vehicles and motions here. The detailing in the background and the water is also pretty good, and the comic actually does a pretty good job of keeping all of the text off of the actual artwork, pushing it all up to the top of the issue to let the artwork speak for itself. And we open up on Robotnik, cradling a Chaos Emerald. No real explanation as to where it came from or how he got his hands on it, but here it is. Robotnik plans on using it for the power source for a new mega engine, but lucky for us, Crab Meat is back for a brief period, specifically to screw everything up. He accidentally sets something, power inducers, technobabble. The point is, he sets some stuff wrong and it causes a big explosion. The resulting explosion actually causes the Chaos Emerald to split in half and both pieces start flying off in opposite directions. Robotnik stating that such a thing can be pretty dangerous because of the power imbalance and stuff like that, makes a quick call to Bounty Hunters R Us, while we cut to Sonic in the kitchen making chili. But since watching characters eat is really boring if you aren't watching Food Wars, Tails comes in and says that Rotor needs to talk to him. As it turns out, Rotor's picked up a massive power spike, and thanks to plot convenience monitors, they can actually see the half of the Chaos Emerald land on an empty plane. And then, things get weird. Apparently, a shattered emerald is so unbalanced that it can cause things like this to happen. Yes, the emerald is actually creating a brand new zone, basically one of the levels that Sonic runs through in one of his games. Bet you can't guess which zones this one is creating. When Rotor brings up that the energy is still unstable, even after the formation of the zone, Sonic takes off with the intent of getting to it before it can cause any sort of damage to reality. However, a mysterious silhouetted figure who is completely not spoiled by the cover of the issue, or the game, or any of the promotional material, and watches him speed off, deciding to follow after Sonic and grab both him and the emerald as soon as he can. And then we cut to Angel Island, where its guardian is catching some rays. However, the second half of the emerald passes in front of the sun, temporarily turning everything green. Weird. And then Knuckles takes off towards the mountain where it fell. Knuckles finds it, but finds that the emerald is still burrowing its way into the mountain, and before he can grab it, the place starts shaking, and he's knocked out and sent falling by a loosened rock. Cut back to Sonic, who finds a Triple Trouble tent full of all the zones. He dashes in, but he's still being pursued by that mysterious silhouetted villain working for Robotnik, who is driving a not-silhouetted hoverbike. Now why does that look so familiar? And then the next 2 pages are pretty much just the big advertisement for Triple Trouble. Was wondering when we get to the blatant advertising. It's literally just a montage of single panels showing Sonic going through each of the zones found in the Game Gear game, and then he gets the Chaos Emerald. Simple as that. Boy, what an adventure. Sonic grabs the emerald, but is immediately knocked out by the now not silhouetted Nack the Weasel, a character who had a far better run here in the comics than he ever did in the video games. Aside from Triple Trouble, I think the only other game he appeared in was Sonic the Fighters, which most people didn't even know existed until it came out online and in the Sonic Gems collection. Nack agrees to bring the emerald and Sonic to Robotnik, and even hunt down the other half of the emerald for double his original fee, which Robotnik reluctantly agrees to. Doesn't seem like that good of an idea to try and extort a world dictator, but that's just me. Cut back to Knuckles, who wakes up somewhere in a cave with these guys. Yeah, you remember these guys? From way back in like issue 2 or 3. Knuckles recognizes them as the Ancient Walkers, but of course we're not given any more details about them, And while they were able to talk before, they don't seem that talkative this time around, instead communicating via cave paintings that basically explain that the emerald, somehow, senses that another whole emerald is nearby, and it's trying to make its way towards it in hopes of merging with it to become whole. But if that happens, things are gonna go boom. Always nice when we're speeding through the exposition like this, isn't it? Knuckles needs to head back to the island, so the walkers make him smell their old cooking or something, and then he wakes up back on Angel Island, none the worse for wear after falling off of a mountain. And conveniently, Nack is headed right for him. Knuckles ambushes him on the pretense that he might know something about the emerald, but sends his bike right into the lake, not knowing that Sonic was tied up in the trunk. Of course, Sonic wakes up and spins right out of it without any problem, and then he and Knuckles start to fight. Neither of them thinks to actually explain what's going on, they just decide that they're going to kick the crap out of one another. The fight lasts for about 2 pages, and to its credit, it's a heck of a lot more kinetic and brutal than most of the other fights between these two. Their fight is interrupted quickly when Robotnik tries to call up Nack for a status update. The two of them pull a Weekend at Bernie's situation to get some information about the situation, and without a moment to spare, they take a conveniently placed tunnel nearby to get to the Emerald Chamber, and thankfully, the Chaos Emerald is more interested in rejoining with its original half than the unfamiliar Whole Emerald. Crisis averted. Or is it? After returning to its whole state, the emerald vanishes, and Sonic and Knuckles are back on the surface, leading to both of them suspecting the other of taking the emerald for themselves, thus preserving the animosity towards one another. Sonic ties up Nack and uses his somehow still functioning hoverbike to get off the island, and that's about it for that. However, we get a brief epilogue showing that the ancient walkers had the emerald transported to them for some reason. Something about a prophecy and a cycle beginning again. It's standard comic book narration, though I have to admit, I can't really recall if this actually followed up on anything at any point in the future. I suppose we'll figure it out as we move forward. This story is, once again, something that goes through the motions. The writing is rapid fire, moving from plot point to plot point, without much explanation or giving the audience a chance to sit down and absorb what the hell is going on. I give it props for at least trying to have a decent confrontation between Sonic and Knuckles for a change, but the stupidity of the situation, and the fact that it's just a fight scene for the sake of it, makes it rather pointless. Sadly, there would be much worse examples of this sort of thing later on in the comics' history as well. Nack, like I've said, would go on to be a pretty important recurring character for the comic, but his introduction here is pretty inconsequential. It could have been a random badnik apprehending Sonic for all the difference it made, with his only real reason for being there being the game tie-in, which barely even gets much time to exist in the story that shares its name. This is barely even an in-name only adaptation. And then there's the whole thing with the ancient walkers, which would become yet another plot tumor for the comic later on when the book started to collapse under the strain of its own lore. But yes, it is a double-sized issue, and with how fast we finished the main book, I'm willing to bet we'll have some good quality backup story. Oh no, first one's a 4-page backup that basically just exists to tell us where the Sea Fox submarine came from. Rotor gives Tails a submarine, as you do, which of course doesn't work because he didn't put oil in it, which was alluded to in the first part of the backup story of issue 28, which we went over last time. Starting to get confused? Me too, and I'm the one trying to write this stuff. While Tails throws a bit of a mini temper tantrum over being treated like a child, an oil-drenched seagull swims up, and Tails fishes him out of the water, where he explains that Robotnik's got a new underwater robot factory in the works, a rebuilt version of the one destroyed in the original Sonic Limited series, which I didn't actually cover because I started with the proper issue 1 of this series. And no, I'm not going to cover them. Tails drains the oil off the gull, off-screen of course, because no one wants to see that, and uses it to get his submarine working. He drives it down to the robot factory where a robotic octopus named, of course, Octobot, is throwing aquatic creatures into the roboticizer. Tails literally takes him out in a single panel by ramming into him with his big drill, and then blows up the factory, while Octobot swears vengeance on Tails. Tails returns and says he can't wait to tell the freedom fighters about his adventure, and that's it, the end. Well, not a whole lot to say about that. It exists, and basically tries to lay a bit of the groundwork for the Tails miniseries that'll be happening a little down the line. Oh god, another miniseries. And now we move to our third and final story for the special, First Contact. We open on Knuckles assisting Vector the Crocodile in his original form from Knuckles Chaotix in getting out of a lava-filled crater before he just walks off. Well, that was pointless. Thanks for letting us know that character exists, though. Smelling smoke, Knuckles walks off and discovers the word Archimedes has been burned into a rock with an arrow pointing off in the distance. Knuckles walks off and follows it, only to be hailed by a bird named Cat Weasel. Quite a name, but that's basically all that's special about this character considering he does absolutely nothing and is just there to pad out the story for 3 panels or so. Knuckles is then attacked by the first boss from the Angel Island zone in Sonic 3. Then he blows it up. Then he immediately is attacked by the first boss of Mushroom Forest Zone in Sonic and Knuckles. And then he kicks it. Again, pointless. Look folks, I know that comics as sequential art should have at least a little bit of action in them, especially when you're dealing with a younger audience, as the energy can be good to keep their attention. But if a fight scene does not have any real relevance, then it's just padding, and it can actually hurt the story as a whole. And then he falls through the ground into the Emerald Chamber. Jesus, how many tunnels are there into this place? No wonder this thing keeps getting stolen if it's this easy to fall into it by accident. A mysterious voice starts talking to Knuckles, who immediately starts to think it's either Robotnik or Sonic, which the voice immediately scolds him for, even when he had seen his name on the rock earlier in the story. He says that he's not yet ready for the truth because he doesn't think about things before he acts. And so, Knuckles is left with more questions than answers, as are the audience. And those are questions that we won't be getting answers to for a good long while. Thanks for that, Ken Penders. This story, much like the other two, moves at a breakneck pace, and is once again mostly just a setup for more stuff that will happen down the road as we slowly, very slowly, move towards the Knuckles the Echidna ongoing series. This one wouldn't be that bad if it also wasn't padded to hell with 2 pages of unnecessary out-of-context action. This is the sort of thing that really shouldn't be relegated to brief backup stories because it just feels like you're stringing the audience along for far too long. If you haven't noticed by now, a recurring theme in these special issues is that they routinely prove that they aren't that special aside from the added page count, which really isn't put to that good of a use. So next time, we're going back to the main series and oh boy, once again we have a cover that is making some lofty promises here. I'll see you all next time for issue 29.